All right, I'm ready.
Okay. So, thank you, Chris Wills. He sent us in a game idea. I don't know if it was for real or if it was, it was not.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to play it.
We take all suggestions seriously.
Yes.
We may not do them, but we take them seriously.
We take them seriously.
Mm-hmm.
So, I haven't come up with a name for this game yet. But so I think I'm going to go amazed and perplexed. So the theme of this game is that I have a list of 5 to 6 items, and I'm going to throw them out at Jason, lightning round style, and they're going to have to do with things like church culture, random Bible texts, and I'm going to throw it to Jason, and Jason's going to give us his quick Twitch response of if he's amazed or perplexed by it, and then he's got to give us a quick summation of why he is amazed or perplexed.
With no preparation.
No preparation
I have no idea
whatsoever.
what's coming at me. All right, here we go.
Okay, so you ready? Number 1.
Okay.
The preacher who wears skinny jeans.
Perplexed.
All right, quicker.
When did fashion become part of the process?
Okay, that's fair. Okay, let's see. When the children mock the man for being bald and they get mauled by a bear. Perplexed or amazed?
Amazed. God's justice is swift. Be careful.
Justice is swift. When the assassin stabs the king, I can never remember his name.
Ehud,
that's right. And he is so fat that it swallows the whole sword. Are you amazed or perplexed?
Perplexed. That's a lot of girth. I don't know what to make of that one.
Yeah, I didn't pass my anatomy classes, so.
How small is that sword?
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
We always think of big broad swords,
Mm-hmm.
This is the biblical analysis that people come to us for. The vaguely eggy casserole that you find at potlucks at churches.
Perplexed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how they get there. What's in that? Why would you do that?
Do you wonder if there was ever a class taught that you didn't know? How do you get the most bland casserole that you can find? I don't know. This is one of those things that one of those jokes that I make fun of Hannah all the time because she hates how much salt and seasoning are put on food. But white people really do hate seasoning, and I don't get it. I
do want to say this because I think it's a generational thing too. We had a thing at our church where we did generational lunches, 50s, 60s, 30, 40. And man, the 2030 potluck, it did not go. I had to order out pizza because we had no food. So you get the eggy casseroles or the no food.
We're all okay. So this is the favorite one, and maybe we'll issue a if there are any young children, you should maybe think about pausing it here and now. One of our favorite passages when God asks David to go and get a certain number of body parts, and David comes back with double those body parts. Amazed or perplexed, Jason?
Totally perplexed. That is cruel and unusual punishment for everybody involved, even David. Yeah, that's all I got on that.
Well, I think it's much worse for the actual David's men who asked. Well, yes, those guys, but in terms of the side of David, the worthless peons.
Yeah.
It's got to be much worse.
Can you imagine getting that mission? It's all right, guys, we're going to go in there and we're going to. All right.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast. My name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And we are so excited to be with you today. Our passage that we are going to be discussing is found in John chapter 8. And it's a very famous story. It's the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery. So how the story starts off, Jesus is in the temple courts, and the Pharisees bring a woman to him that has been caught in the act of adultery. And they ask Jesus, will he condemn her? Will he stone her? And Jesus, he bends down to the earth. He writes some stuff in the dirt. We'll talk about what we think that is. And he says to the Pharisees, let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And so he stands up. The Pharisees, they slowly, sulkily go away, and he picks the woman up, and he tells her to go and sin no more. So, Jason, what amazes you about this passage?
One of the things that amazes me, it harkens back to one time you and I, Connor and I, read through a gospel and we tried to read it as if we had never read the Bible before. We knew nothing. We'd never been to church, and tried to experience that with fresh eyes. In some ways, it was a predecessor to Amazed and Perplexed. But one of the biggest challenges was reading something you've heard a million times and seeing it with fresh eyes. So that is a challenge. From that vantage point, though, the thing that amazes me is when you tap into this has nothing to do with the woman. This woman was nothing to the Pharisees. She was a prop. Tim Rush will even say, this woman's in no danger because they're not going to stone her because at this point, at least, they were mindful of the law. Mm-hmm. They just want to trap Jesus. And for Jesus to find a way, I just can't. I don't even understand how to get there. When I have people come to me and I know they're trying to be mean to me, or I sense it and they're trying to trap me, and I can't even compare what I go through with what Jesus is going through here, because these people eventually want his death, obviously.
Sure.
The way that he is able to disarm the situation and not just overpower, because all I got is, well, I'm going to yell at you or shame you or humiliate you, mm-hmm. and he just disarms it in this way that is so staggering. I cannot imagine walking into a situation like that and being 1/millionth as successful.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before, Jason and I. Like the calmness with which, if we put it in sports metaphors, which Jason and I, or at least I'm apt to do very often, it's like he's got ice in his veins. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to imagine this from the perspective of the woman. Like, he's so cool about this. He's so calm. Like, you have to imagine this woman is in agony. Because she doesn't know what's about to happen to her. She's been dragged. She's been humiliated. And you just have this Jesus guy. He's not frantically trying to explain it away or, mm-hmm. Put himself in front of her to make sure nothing happens. It's remarkable.
It is. So what about you? What jumps out at you as being amazing?
To really get at what amazes me about this passage, I think we need to understand a little bit of the context of what is happening here. If you go a chapter earlier into John chapter 7, you will see that this story is happening around the time of the Festival of Tabernacles. Sometimes in the English, we'll translate it as the Festival of Booths or the Festival of Tents. And the Festival of Tabernacles is one of the major festivals or holidays on the Jewish calendar. It occurs at the end of fall, and it's one of the 3 pilgrimage holidays in the Jewish religion. And so what is happening here is thousands and thousands of Jewish people are pouring into the city of Jerusalem to celebrate this festival, to celebrate this 8-day festival. And so they would come and they would participate in these different rituals, and they would hear different teachings, and they would celebrate the fall harvest, and they would pray for the winter rains. And it's this 8-day festival of celebration and anticipation and excitement. What amazes me about this passage is its humanness. The story of the woman caught in adultery is taking place the day after this 8-day festival. And man, doesn't this sound so human? This woman who is celebrated, who has had good food and maybe had a little bit too much wine, finds herself in the tent of a man who isn't her husband, and she gets a little bit carried away, and she sins in this really sad and horrific way. And then after this mistake, after this night of sadness and of sinfulness, she is then yanked out of her tent, and she is paraded before thousands of people, paraded for all to see her humiliation. And if I were to equate it in modern day language, she is forced to take this walk of shame in front of many, many people. And so, man, isn't this just a story ripped out of 2020 America? A woman maybe had a little bit too much to drink, and she made a mistake, and then she's paraded out in front and used as a prop among men. And man, that context just really amazes me.
So what perplexes me about this is, and I really appreciate what you're saying there, that's a contextual dynamic that I don't think I've really considered. So I really appreciate that. There's multiple things. The low-hanging fruit, as they say, is, where did the Pharisees find this woman? Was this a pretty ongoing thing? I've even had people suggest this isn't a recent thing, that in this smaller community, if she has the scarlet letter on her, she's always the woman caught in adultery. But either way, because we have these visuals of, is she wrapped up in a bed sheet? Is she, this kind of thing? Like, how did they catch her? Where's the man? These kind of things. The deeper perplexingness of it, perplexion, that's not right. I'll work on that. But that deeper sense of being perplexed relates to how do I act like Jesus in this? Because in my sense, if I'm there, I am running to her and giving her a hug. He doesn't even acknowledge her. Mm-hmm. It's really weird. Like, if you're watching this and you're like, this woman is about to be killed, and you see Jesus and he's right, like we make this like, oh, it's so dramatic. He bends down and writes in the dirt. And I would say, how uncaring.
Yeah.
Like, this woman, my assumption is, like you've described, I would share that. There's shame in this, no matter when it happened. How much more if it just happened, if she's still wiping sleep out of her eyes, and he doesn't tend to her at all. Like, he didn't hug her. He doesn't. It's like she's irrelevant. Like, he's just talking about the problem. Now at the end, he redeems it all.
Sure.
Which, that's another place, is how do I feel like God is working in my life? If God's working in my life, he's really awkward at it. And then at the end, it's like, oh, wow, that's such a beautiful story.
Yeah, I think for this woman, halfway through, she's been treated like a prop by the Pharisees. And through most of the story, it seems like Jesus is doing the same thing.
Right.
It doesn't even seem like she ultimately matters to Jesus. And man, that really speaks to me. So many times throughout the middle of my story, it feels like, man, does God even really care about me? What you said there, it gets to what perplexes me as well. When it comes to like establishing how we're supposed to act, when it comes to how we are supposed to live our lives, and ultimately honor God and honor what He has called humanity to be, man, He ups the game. And when He talks about lust, he raises the bar even higher. And what perplexes me, and it's not what perplexes me about Jesus, because I totally see it, but what perplexes about how do I handle these situations? Mm-hmm. Jesus, when he's speaking in the abstract about sin, I mean, he's very direct and very concrete and very harsh. But so many times when he's dealing with somebody, an innocent or a victim who has sinned, his harshness, the emphasis that he has is so much more on grace for the individual in front of him, rather than let me get the doctrine out. And so there's a nature here that I don't know how to play with, and I feel like Christians all over the world struggle with this of, how does Jesus walk the line of, yes, confirming truth, talking about, yes, here's what I've called you to, but also leaning into grace.
Yes. Oh, okay. This is our next 4 hours, because I just think we could go on all day with this. So I frame it this way, but I think it has relevance. If all you had was the Sermon on the Mount, mm-hmm. that's it. You just, the Old Testament ends, and then you have the Sermon on the Mount, and, just almost a bullet point. Here's how to be saved, and that's the Bible's done. You would think this Jesus was one of the hardest people to live with in the universe.
Yeah.
Because if that shocks you, think about it this way. If I walk into a room and for whatever reason you give me credibility, like, oh, this guy's a great teacher, and once I start speaking, you're like, yeah, he's really good, and I'm like, hey, do you feel good that you're not in prison? Do you feel good? I'm telling you, if you judge a prisoner, you're wrong. You're far away from God. Oh, crud. Like, mm-hmm. everything, they'd feel good about themselves. Do you feel good that you give food to the homeless? I'm telling you, if you give with any condescension, you might as well not have given anything. Mm-hmm. It's just like, this guy'd be a tyrant to live with. Like, no matter what we feel good about, he's like, not good enough. And then he, a little past the midway point, he's like, and one more thing, be just like God, be holy, just like he's holy. And I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah.
And then you see him with people, and it's almost hard to put in the same, how is the Sermon on the Mount always in your brain, and you're not the most judgmental, dogmatic person in the world? And he's not. Mm-hmm. The other thing, though, he doesn't go to the other extreme of feeling like he has to rescue everyone. Mm. And I see Christians in both ends. We either go to full dogma, I'm right, there's truth, whatever that is, or they go to full compassion. And, well, what's it matter if we tell people the truth, as long as we ... And both of those are an aspect of Jesus, mm-hmm. but none of those are Jesus. And I think that this idea of, so what's the trick?
Yeah.
Because I'm not throwing up my hands, and I'm not suggesting Jesus would lead us to throw up my hands. I'm trying to frame,
Sure.
This is how complex this is.
So for me, I know in terms of this issue where I kind of lean, like if I'm going to err, I'm almost always going to err on the side of grace. I think that's just because of the context that I've grown up, that the context of, I guess, the American church. Some of the sins that it's fighting now is there were people who leaned into the quote unquote truth aspect of things, although sometimes there wasn't even truth. And so we're at an interesting point, because I think you're similar, Jason. The pendulum swung right from the side of from the doctrine, truth side of things to the compassion side of things. And so for me, I know the work that I have to do is getting the courage to still swing back a little bit more and talk about truth and doctrine. And so how do I safeguard myself from not swinging too far, knowing that I'm never going to get dead center perfect, but how do I safeguard myself?
Yeah, that's a good question. And tune in next week. Right now, just kidding. So here's my 2 cents on that. It has to do with the expectation of God. Mm-hmm. It cannot be said enough or too strongly or too repetitively. God doesn't ask you to master the material, and churches ask us to master the material. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing good about church. There's tons of good things about church. Every person that brings Christ with them to a gathering, there's tons of good things there. Mm-hmm. But the emphasis overall, certainly the takeaway that I had as a child coming into my adult years, was you must master this material. It was like a constant, for those who are familiar with Bible Ball. It was like and when you're in a church service, it's like you're playing Bible Ball all the time. You know what I mean? Oh, did he say that right? Oh, he used a word. And most of the time we'd be on autopilot because the guy would say exactly what we thought anyway. But if the guy brought up something that wasn't in our sphere, that we didn't usually hear, it'd be Bible again. You got the buzzer in your hand, or however your format was, and you're like, what's right, what's wrong? What's right, what's wrong? Yeah. And then you walk with Jesus, and you're like, you would think he'd be drilling them on Old Testament scripture, wouldn't you? All right, everybody, take out your scrolls. Yeah. First one to find Isaiah, whatever, And it's not that way. It's shocking. His discipling has so little to do with memorizing anything. And there's not evil to memorize. But I contrasted with what I was raised with, where if you want to be a good Christian, you had to know so much, and you better get it right.
So I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here. I think the debate on how well educated the disciples are, I don't know. I haven't read that much about it. They're poor, right? So they're not going to be as well educated. But would they still have known quite a bit of the Old Testament just as a part of their upbringing?
When I think of the apostles' biblical knowledge, I think it's probably corollary to most American Christians' biblical knowledge. They learned a lot from culture. They knew there was a Messiah coming. They knew to expect that he'd be like David. And of course, that led to a lot of their misunderstandings. But they didn't have you don't see any discussions with him at all about them saying, it says in Isaiah, like that just doesn't pop up, And I think that's good. That's a good signal to us, because one of the key things is this dynamic of God never asked us to master the material. And I feel like much of my church experience was master the material. And Jesus's and God could have asked that. And there's encouragement to study. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm saying if my dependence is on my knowledge of the material, which my dependence for decades was, then I'm by design, I guess you would say, or by implication, better said, is I'm not trusting in God. I'm trusting in my material understanding. And I think that's really important that Jesus shows that through his relationship with the apostles. Yes, keep learning about God, keep studying his Bible, but it's about trusting him. And so that relates directly to how do we know what to do in a situation. If we've been taught you have to master the material, then the next expectation is you need to master how to handle all these situations. And that gets scary and overwhelming. And I think many of us just shut down. And we say, well, I guess I'm just not good enough to be in the kingdom. And the prerequisite is always and only, will you trust God to lead you? And yes, he'll use everything you've studied, but he'll also provide stuff you haven't studied. And so that's the linchpin of what made them successful and what makes us successful. So what perplexes me?
I don't know. That was a 5-10 minute tangent. So I don't know. Did you say that?
I don't know. I don't care.
You can have another perplexed.
No. I don't know. I didn't know where to go. So let's go.
So I'll
writing in the sand.
Yes, writing in the dirt, sand. I'm keeping all of that in. It's a really weird scene when you think about it, especially when you think about it from the perspective of the woman. And if you've ever been in danger, even just like a simple danger, like somebody almost ran you off the road and like on the highway, and you had your blood pressure kick up and you could feel like your heart beating throughout your entire body, and adrenaline just kicks into you and you're acutely aware of every single thing that's going on. I wonder if that same thing is happening to the woman caught in adultery. She realized like her body is kicking into fight or flight mode. Her body is like, this could be the end. And so I imagine she's experiencing this in fractions of, like, she's seeing everything just so quickly, so acutely. And how odd it must be for her to watch Jesus write in the sand. And really it's odd for a lot of people. Like, what is he doing? There are some people that will say, this was a practice that people do. Jesus is drawing figures in the sand. I've heard that. I've heard say that Jesus is writing the sins of the Pharisees into the sands. One of the things, one of the explanations that I've recently heard or recently reheard that I think is very compelling. Like I said, this is happening the day after the end of the Festival of Tabernacles, and during the Festival of Tabernacles, there'd be a lot of teaching from the Scriptures. And one of the teachings, from my understanding, that would be brought up was a teaching found in Jeremiah. And so in Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 13, it says, "Lord, you are the hope of Israel. All who forsake you will be put to shame. Those who turn away from you will be written in the dust because they have forsaken the Lord, the spring of living water." And so that last part, that spring of living water, we could go and do 1,000 things on that, because Jesus, if this is what Jesus is after, like a chapter earlier, we'll go a little bit nerdy, Jesus talks about being the living water, and the Festival of Tabernacles is all about water. It's all about a God providing rain and all this good stuff. But I think this is a very compelling explanation for what Jesus is doing when he writes in the sand, because like you said, the Pharisees would know their Jeremiah, they would know their Old Testament, their Hebrew Bible. And so what some people believe, and what I tend to believe, is that Jesus is writing the names of the Pharisees in the dust because they're actively turning away from God, and they're actively leading Israel away from God.
I think that is a fascinating explanation, and it really makes your mind run. Now, here's the interesting thing to me, and this is a more general thing about what perplexes me about the Bible, is that why does he include it, this detail that Jesus is writing in the dust, the dust? Why is he including it and not giving us more explanation? Like, why make this even a piece of it, without giving us more explanation? So that part alone is, there's a quirkiness to God and his storytellers in that it's almost like they're winking at us. Don't you want to know? Don't you? And I like that about God, but it also is like, that might help.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is one of the really important things about when we're studying the Bible. Jason and I talked about this. Like, we were not the intended audience for this. And so there's a lot of things that we can miss because we don't have the basic cultural understanding of who this was being written to in the first place. And so, for me, I've read that story my entire life, and I was like, oh, Jesus writes something in the dust. And I was mildly interested in it. But when somebody like goes deep and explains, hey, here's why I think Jesus is referencing Jeremiah. Here's why I think this is happening. Like, Scripture really comes alive for me in that moment. And if you ever listen to the Bible Project guys, they do some amazing work. If I could recommend another podcast that isn't Amazed and Perplexed, it would be them, because they talk about so often the hyperlinks that Jesus is doing. So many times when Jesus is saying something specific, he is hyperlinking to a dozen other things in the Old Testament. And when you really begin to dive into them, it just makes Scripture come alive. Even so much so that, like, you get the small fine print at the bottom of your Bible. I think it does a disservice to us, because when I see small writing, my eyes glaze over and I'm not interested in, I got to go click on these other things. But when you really begin to dive into it and really get into what was the audience that this was intended for? What were they like? What would they have heard when they heard this? What was the cultural perspective at that point?
Right. And I'll tell you, being such a big fan of context, your explanation, and it could include all of them. I mean, you include those three things. He's writing their names down. He could be writing that passage or a phrase from that passage and then listing specifically the people or the actions that were happening that were putting them into this category that they would hate. They'd be like, oh, those people are the low. And he could be doing that. Whatever it is, though, we know it was such that there was no debate. That's what's shocking to me.
Yeah.
It is so perplexing to me how that works, that whatever he writes down, that is clearly the focal point of what changes them. I mean, he says the one without sin, but I don't think that's enough. Number one, I think that's why he wrote down, that's why they say, or John here writes, he bent down the dirt and started writing. Is to say, hey, something was happening there. But I don't think him saying just the phrase, hey, he who's without the first sin, or he who's without sin can throw the first stone. And because I don't think this group is just going to be swayed by that. They don't show rational thought. There has to be something emotional that hit them. And plus, from their vantage point, that didn't overrule what was written in the Old Testament when it talked about stoning.
Sure.
The quality of the people doing the stoning wasn't the issue in the stoning. It was what infraction has happened. And so I don't think that phrase alone, I think that phrase steered people. I think they were stuck. This is my sense, is they're sitting there, they're all fired up. We're going to get Jesus. And I don't think they're worried. You'd normally, I think, have a little anxiety if you're about to kill a person. I don't even know if they're thinking.
I usually
that
feel
way.
pretty nervous.
You feel pretty nervous, yeah. I'd imagine that's true. And so, but I think their whole thing is, we're going to get Jesus. We've got him in this rock and a hard place. We're going to win. And then something happens that catches them. And then that phrase, if you don't have sin, you can throw the first stone. It pushed them in whatever direction that had direct correlation to him writing.
Yeah, you imagine like the power dynamics at play, and the shift that takes is absolutely dramatic. You get this group of Pharisees, these powerful men. They bring this woman, this other person, this object that's really not even a human being in their mind, and they have the power over the woman, and in their mind they have power over Jesus. They have the thing that is going to flip the script that they've been trying to do this whole time. And you almost, like, for me, when I read it, I get a sense of like a mob almost, like, a mob mentality of, we have this all figured out. We know what's going to happen, and we're going to get this guy. We're going to get him. And whatever, this woman is neither here nor there, because she's a sinner and she's not of us. She's other than. What I think is fascinating to see is how, like, what I think is really crazy and beautiful is the shift that takes place, like you talked about, from the power of, man, we're going to get this guy, we're going to get this girl, and man, we're going to show him, to just kind of almost embarrassment and just awkwardly walking away. That's the sort of power, like we talk about Jesus, his miracles, like this is like another form. Like, how often does this happen where somebody's able to take an angry mob and turn them away in shame and maybe even possibly a little repentance?
Yeah, I just think, the deeper you put yourself in this scene, the more stunning it gets. It really is stunning. So, this wasn't what drew my attention initially, but let's talk a minute about the woman. Why do you think Jesus doesn't touch her? Like the leper, he touches the leper. There's a sense that there's some physical affection that he shows from time to time.
Yeah.
Why do you think he doesn't? He doesn't touch her. He doesn't. My assumption is there's some eye contact, but maybe not till the very end.
Yeah.
Why do you think he didn't show her more attention?
That's a really good question. I don't have an answer for it, but I do have an interest that sparked an interesting perspective that I had. Mm-hmm. So when they bring this woman to Jesus, they have treated this woman as a they, right? She's this abstract she's apart from us. And at the end of the interaction, the only people that are there are her and Jesus, and the Pharisees have become the they've become the outcasts. And so that doesn't really answer your question, but it kind of...
I love that, though. That's gold. So here's how my mind works on this, but it ties into this, is that you would expect this to almost become, well, you don't know how it's going to go, like we do because we read it, but you don't know if Jesus is going to say, stone her. It's in the law, because it is in the law. We haven't even gone down that road. We're just dealing with this interaction. And they know, of course, they can't legally stone her. That's the same reason why they couldn't legally crucify Jesus. You know what I mean? I don't know how they're getting away with Stephen, but there's displacement there. So anyway, but this bottom line of this solely being a trap for him, he doesn't bring her into it, because then that would put the attention on her.
That's good.
He is keeping it between him and them, so there's the protection. The other thing is, and I don't know if I fully understand that.
Oh, that's really good. So the protection, he's protecting her by not drawing the focus to her. That's good. That's good.
So contrast his technique with the woman is washing his feet, and he's in the house of the Pharisee, and he says, look at this woman. Look at her. Like, he's trying to make a point. He's like, you don't even see her as a person. In this, because of the nature of the accusation and the sexual sin and everything that's gone on there, and the shame, I mean, we hardly, even as a culture, we don't even connect with that shame anymore. But this would be, think Little House on the Prairie time, that one person that sinned. And if you love Little House on the Prairie, I'm not slamming it. I love that show too. But the point is, in all this, is that the shame would be so deep, but this doesn't act like a courtroom. He's not even bringing her as a witness to herself. He's not saying, did you really do it? And where's the guy or anything like that. He totally protects her by making it between him and them. And then once they're gone, this is that specificity of the person.
That is so good. In the Pharisees' minds, when they bring the woman to Jesus, she's not a part of the calculation. She's just a sad person that they happen to know about, and she's a pawn in their schemes. And I think for a lot of us, right, the natural thing would be to draw her in, to make her sympathetic, whatever the thing would be. And Jesus, by not playing into that, Jesus, by not engaging with her, is him rejecting the schemes, the traps that the Pharisees are trying to lay. Okay, that's good.
Well, it just popped in my head. I've never seen this connection before, but in Luke 13, I don't know if we processed that in a podcast yet, but in Luke 13, where they come together and they're telling Jesus about, these bad things are happening in our country. And Jesus' response is, do you think you're better than them? And it's like, what? And he's like, you better repent.
Yeah.
But this is that same thing, is they think the main event, the woman and these, the accusers, they think the main event is Jesus making a decision to defend or condemn her. He makes the main event, what about you and God? And this is a huge learning point for me. It's so hard to keep this in focus, because I tend to want to stop the most obvious sin.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of Christians are driven by this. Instead of taking the time to back up and say, and I'm realizing there's a question we haven't answered, as far as staying in the middle of the pendulum and this grace and truth. But it's that idea of saying, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to never act. I'm not going to move away from fear, but I'm going to wait and see what is it God wants to do with this situation. And the thing that he wants to do, he wants all parties to see him clearer.
Yeah.
And Jesus knew, as long as the crowd was there, she couldn't see them clear. She couldn't see God clear. And he also knew that crowd needed to move on to see God clearer.
Yeah.
Arguing, that just never occurred to me. He's not arguing whether he should or should not. He will not take that bait at all. And I take the bait all the time. When someone, what about this biblical thing? And I'm like, well, let's dig into that. Let's really, and I'm not against good discussion, but oftentimes you walk away and like, was that the quarrels that Paul was describing? And I think that's really important, is he's pretty consistent in, he's saying, I'm thinking about you and your relationship with God. What do you need right now, angry mob? Then once you're out of the scene, now I'm reaching there. And the one thing I'll add is, I've heard people say that, especially if she had just been caught in the act of adultery, and then you have that sensation, and then all of a sudden you're awakened and you're dragged out by angry hands, you've had a lot of touching going on. And just him giving her that, what's the term, body autonomy, just like, I don't have to rescue in that way. Matter of fact, it's fascinating. He lets her lead the conversation. Is there nobody else to accuse you? None. Go and sin no more. And that's baffling on one hand because, as I feel like I've said before, get her a 12-step, some support group, find some friends, get a local church, whatever. And he's just like, you keep going with God. I trust God enough with you that I'm not worrying about what happened. You do not hear him a year later going, I wonder what ever happened to that woman. He entrusted her to God. He did his part, and he moved on. And I think that's good teaching to me.
So there is an issue that I want to bring up real quick about this. This woman is the victim of systematic sexism. The fact that the man isn't here is evidence of that and their opinion on women, and especially her. And yet, and this is one of the crazy things about God takes the systematic sexism that this woman is experiencing and he turns it for good. The man that she was like committing adultery with, he didn't get to see Jesus. He didn't get to be redeemed, and he didn't get to be he didn't get that. And yet Jesus is big enough and God is big enough to take a horrific thing like systematic sexism and turn it for this woman's benefit.
That is beautiful. I know. I wonder a lot. Okay, God, how will you take these other systemic problems in our culture? And that's just beautiful. What you said is that idea of God. This is not outside the scope of God. Mm-hmm. God has deeper purposes, bigger purposes, eternal purposes that He's working, and even systems don't scare Him. They scare us. We don't know how would that ever get better. And that's a great example of Him saying, "Here's a way."
Yeah, and it's not me or you saying, well, we need to just keep up those systems.
Right.
Just want to make that completely clear. But it is saying in the meantime, and we'll always have flawed systems until Jesus comes back. Hopefully they get better, and for the most part they have gotten at least a little bit better. But because we live in a fallen world, there are always going to be people of victims of systems, and Jesus and God, they're in the business of rescuing people out of those systems. And so, man, what a call for us.
That's amazing. I mean, that is really amazing. I appreciate that point.
So, Jason, do you have any wrap up or additional thoughts about the woman caught in adultery?
I just think this is a truly beautiful story, both to see how much He honored her, but He honored them too. Like Jesus loved the angry mob, and He loved the woman. And the way He showed His love to the angry mob was different than the way He showed His love to the woman. But when you step back, when you watch it all unfold, you can see He's wanting both of them, both groups, to move closer to God. And that's the ultimate signal of love.
Mm-hmm. So my last takeaway, it's similar if you listen to our episode on the prodigal son. We named that episode The Prodigal Sons because in reality, both the sons were lost. For most people in their Bible, the heading in this passage is going to be the woman caught in adultery. And I think the more apt, phrasing for that would be the two parties caught in adultery and idolatry. Because it's really fascinating that we focus on the woman, and her redemption. I think it'd be an interesting shift perspective. I think in my mind, when I think of this story from now on, I'm going to try to think of it from both places. The two parties who were caught in their sin. So in terms of our weekly feedback, we want to honor Nathan. Nathan wrote to my wife and I, and he said, I just finished listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast episode. This podcast got me fired. And wow, I'm heartbroken and in disbelief. I just want y'all to know how much I love and look up to you. That was not right what happened. I'll be honest, when I first heard what you said on the opportunity of doubt, I was surprised for a second. I wasn't thinking anything bad or hateful, just a quick, oh, that was surprising. And as I listened on, I realized that you're absolutely right. Me and so many others, if not everyone, have been in the same boat. There are moments in our lives where we have doubt in God, leading us to have feelings of disbelief. You know my family's story, so you know how I might feel about it. But along with you, I share in the fact that your love for Jesus and belief that He is the Son of God never wavered. You talked about how you had 3 optional doors to go through in that situation, and you chose door 3 for good reason. It may have the most difficult challenges, but as we've seen time and time again, God makes beautiful things out of badness. I full-heartedly believe you made the best and right decision because God will do a 180 on the bad outcomes and uncertainties. You also mentioned pastors and people like that are supposed to help people like me with guidance, that you don't have all the answers, but you do the best with what you have. You absolutely have helped guide me, along with Jason, of course, and along with so many others. So thank you for helping to guide me through doubt, all 3 of you. Although I have some doubts in moments of my life, I believe good things become of bad things. And one day I'll look back on the bad and be even more grateful for the good. So I will trust God through it all. You all have truly blessed not only me, but everyone else listening to your podcast, and even people who don't listen to it, because y'all have been blessing me long before. So thank you all. I love you guys so much. Thank you, Nathan. We honor and we love everything you say. We thank you for listening. If you would share this with a friend, that would just be such a blessing for us. If you would be willing to step out and to share it with a friend, it would mean so, so much to us. Thank you. Grace, peace, and love.